Hello again and welcome back to Module 2, Week two's Learning Outcomes and Learning Objectives brief mini lecture. So this week, our second part will discuss Learning Objectives 5.1 and 5.6, specifically how we manage the employment planning process and explain the main techniques used in employment planning and forecasting, and 5.6, which discusses and explains how to recruit a more diverse workforce. So we'll go into both of those in some detail. And so let's begin by talking briefly about workforce planning and forecasting, which can sound kind of intimidating or all-encompassing. Well, whenever we talk about forecasting, we're talking about the future, looking at the future and how we plan to meet future needs. So we have to kind of build a strategy. We look at workforce plans that should flow from the firm's strategic plans and how they're going to be affected, how they're affected by needs to fill or eliminate positions or to increase workflows, increase productivity, and to look at costs or reducing and increasing costs. Labor costs, as we know, are significant costs in any organization, particularly, for example, in manufacturing. Service industries can range from 60% up to 70%. So increasing and reducing cost is a very important element of the strategy we must look at when we're talking about workforce planning. Looking at labor needs or labor demands is another important area that we'll look at, forecasting revenues and then estimating the size of the staff required to achieve certain types of sales volumes, for example. So we can look at trend analysis and a trend analysis across years, looking at how studying a firm's employment levels over a particular time period, looking at productivity and initiatives across those same time periods can help us to predict future needs. We look at things like ratio analysis, which involves making forecasts based on a particular ratio. It might be some causal factors such as sales volumes and maybe the number of employees required to achieve certain volumes and the number of salespeople, for example. So we'll also look at tools like the scatter plot, which shows graphically how two variables, sales and your firm's staffing levels, are related, which is an important concept, an important tool to look at. It gives us a snapshot, a management snapshot of where we are and how we need to move forward, and it helps us in terms of predicting future labor strategies. And then look at managerial judgment in terms of how we need to adjust in our forecasting efforts. So we'll also talk about forecasting the supply of outside candidates as opposed to those inside our organization. One of the things that we must consider is that how the involvement of employees and their potential to move up into different positions in their organization, their ability to fill key positions is really important. So we build things like succession planning tools that help us to predict where employees are, where they need to be, and there's a gap between where they are and where they need to be, and we should, in our succession planning process, be able to fill those gaps. Looking at predictive workforce monitoring strategies, for example, and having a talent management philosophy for workforce planning, which requires organizations to pay continuous attention to workforce planning issues. So now let's move on and talk about another very important concept in Learning Objective 5.6 in this week two's module, which is recruiting a more diverse workforce. So when we talk about diversity, the question that I always ask is, what is diversity? And we always come up with this the answers that are very observable, which is gender, race, ethnicity, age, and those kinds of things. So in this module, we really want to focus on in-depth evaluation of who these people are and how we recruit them. So let's talk about recruiting women. So the most effective strategy or top management strategy relies on or emphasizes the importance of recruiting women as well as men, and identifies some gaps that might exist in the recruitment and retention of women, and puts into place a common or a comprehensive plan to attract women applicants. As simple as that sounds, we need to really pay close attention to our operations, to how we do our recruitment planning and strategies, so that we can target organizations, schools, colleges, and other sources to obtain or to attract women as part of our workforce. Recruiting single parents is another important concept. Recruiting and keeping them requires understanding several problems that they face, such as the need for personal or sick time, excuse days off, to take care of sick children, and to meet the needs of those this group of diverse employees. Many firms create these programs that have flex time and some other forms of flexibility in their schedules. Older workers, needless to say, are a growing phenomenon in the workplace in the United States, and it's actually the fastest growing labor segment. And that segment includes people between 45 and 64 years old. Recent surveys of AARP and the Society for Human Resource Management concluded that, for example, that older workers tend to have lower absenteeism, more reliability in terms of their dedication to work, and better work habits than younger workers. And this is not me saying that. There were surveys that show that. Okay, so and we have to consider that diversity counts. A heterogeneous society that we live in, a heterogeneous workforce, mirrors that society. And as we look at heterogeneity in the workforce, we begin to understand the value of decisions and choices and work ethic that are inherent in heterogeneous work groups, for example. So, and recruiting minorities is a particularly important concept that we will cover in this chapter as well. Now, it really requires employers to understand the barriers that prevent minorities from applying, and to tailor their way of thinking to design HR practices to attract minority workers. And finally, the disabled is another group that we employers can do several things to tap into this huge potential workforce. The Department of Labor, for example, Office of Disability and Employment Policy offers several programs, and all states have local agencies that provide placement services and other recruitment and training tools to assist employers with matching jobs with those who are disabled to different degrees. So as we go through this chapter and this module, those two learning outcomes, 4.1 and 4.3 and 5.1 and 5.6 in this chapter, are increasingly important, and we will focus on them more in our discussion and lecture, and hopefully you'll benefit greatly from those two chapters. Okay, thank you, and stay tuned. We're going to move to chapter the module 3, which is week 3's activities. Okay, thank you. Bye-bye.